The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus went across the Sea of Galilee. A large crowd followed him because they saw the signs he was performing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. The Jewish feast of Passover was near. When Jesus raised his eyes and saw that it was a large crowd coming to him, he said to Philip, "Where can we buy enough food for them to eat?" He said this to test him, because he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered, 200 days' wages worth of food would not be enough for each of them to have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what good are those for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people recline." Now there was a great deal of grass in that place, so the men reclined, about 5,000 in number. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed them to those who were reclining, and also as much of the fish as they wanted. When they had had their fill, he said to his disciples, "Gather the fragments left over, so that nothing will be wasted." So they collected them and filled 12 wicker baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves that had been more than they could eat. When the people saw the sign he had done, they said, "This is truly the prophet, the one who has come into the world." Since Jesus knew that they were going to come and carry him off to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain alone. My sisters and brothers, the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Thomas Merton, the great Trappist monk who died in 1968, but who from the time in the late 40s when he was in the Trappist monastery till that time wrote many books based on his depth of prayer and contemplation and really seeking the wisdom of God. And probably some of you have read some of his writings. If you haven't, you should sometimes. And he was a great influence on our Catholic Christian faith, rediscovering, not just for monks, but for everyone, the monastic kind of contemplative sort of prayer. And one of the things he said back then, because back then, unfortunately, like maybe always, war and violence. And he said the first casualty of violence, of war, is often the truth. And why I bring that up goes back to the first reading of what the Sanhedrin is doing. Initially, when they were plotting against Jesus practically in his whole ministry, they didn't see clearly. All they saw was this man who was criticizing them in some way, although it was legitimate criticism. This man who was very popular, this man who, even like in today's gospel, some people wanted to make king because he was a miracle worker. And from the beginning, they didn't see clearly because they didn't want to see clearly. They were furious, they were upset, they were jealous, they were hostile. And so all they could see is, we got to find a way to kill this guy, to get rid of him. And so now we look at the first reading today, and there, Peter and the others are before the Sanhedrin. And again, all they can see, because these disciples are proclaiming this Jesus they had just put to death, and so they're ready to put them to death too. Again, not seeing clearly the goodness, the love, people's lives touched. No way. They just saw some people that they needed, again, to get rid of because they're proclaiming the name of Jesus. And finally, and often it's only one, isn't it? One man in the Sanhedrin speaks out and says, "Hey, let's step back here," and dares to speak to the others and say, that, as he puts here, let me get it out. "I tell you, have nothing to do with these men, let them go. For if this endeavor or this activity is of human origin, it'll destroy itself. Which is what they thought. I mean, of course it's of human origin. But no, he said, wait a second. It may be of God. If it comes from God, you will not be able to destroy them. You may even find yourself fighting against God. First time in the Sanhedrin, anybody dared to say that, because they had justified all their violence, all their hatred. And Gamaliel says, step back, wait. This may be of God. And they couldn't even think of it that way. And so we bring that up. We know in every age, even in our own daily relationships with one another, sometimes all we see is our own point of view. We all know it. Sometimes we get in arguments and we don't see the other person's perspective at all. And we look at it as we're of course right and they're of course wrong. Now, in many situations, proclaiming our faith, that may be true. But in some situations, our own ego may be the real issue of not seeing clearly, only seeing what we want to see. So again, today, whether it be in our personal relationships, whether it be in our nation today, whether it be in our world, we need the Gamaliels who say, step back, prayerfully discern. Again, ego can get in the way. And so let's just take a moment and look in ourselves. We can see in our nation and our world that we all need to be more prayerful, like Thomas Merton, who was very critical even of many of the things the nation was doing in the 1960s. And he did that from a status of prayer to really sincerely in the monastery say, God, help me to see what you see. Help me to speak what you call me to speak. Help me to be rid of ego and more into the true self, following Jesus you call me to be. Take a quiet moment and see what maybe each of us need to ponder. God bless you.